Chapter 36, Operations. So this chapter, although there's a lot of information in there, and it's all valid information, there's very little for us to actually discuss. I encourage everybody to read through this chapter, look over the PowerPoint, and just kind of generally get an understanding of the procedures that are recommended. But at the end of the day, the vast majority of the content of this chapter will be covered by department or agency-specific policies, protocols, procedures, etc. So we'll hit on a couple of the big key issues, things that you may want to know for an exam. But other than that, this is a self-read chapter. So preparing for the ambulance call itself, first of all, being familiar with your equipment, knowing where everything is at, and being in the right mindset. Those are the biggest things that you need to be thinking about when you're preparing for that call. This chapter talks a lot about doing inventories, looking over the vehicle, doing what we call rig checks, ensuring that everything is operational, that your inventory is present, and everything is ready for the next call. So that is your biggest responsibility. And as an EMT, that requires you to do a complete inventory of the vehicle itself. Make sure your supplies are there, that they're in working order, and that no matter what call comes out next, you're ready to respond. Failure to do any of that could constitute a negligence call. Consider your oxygen. Let's say that somebody forgot to restock the oxygen. You respond to a respiratory distress call, and now you don't have any oxygen on board the vehicle to administer to the patient. Failure to restock and verify that everything was ready to go. If that, in fact, led to some type of harm to the patient, that would be a negligence claim. The duty to act is related to the standard of care in that case, and the standard of care says that you should be prepared, fully stocked, and ready to go for every call. If you fail to do so and damages result, then there's that causation claim, and of course, that's a guilty verdict for negligence. Negligence is going to cost you your job, and it could cost you some personal finances depending on litigation and other lawsuits. So probably the biggest takeaway from there. There's different types of ambulances for different purposes. Something like this is the most common these days, and it's on a truck chassis. It offers a larger box in the back to allow for more movement around the patient care compartment. Something like this is better for just basic transports to and from, let's say, a dialysis center or from a nursing home, those types of things. So not really designed for a whole lot of patient care in the back, really more just transport only. Some older models here, again, larger boxes that allow us to carry additional supplies and perform a little bit more in the way of patient care. So go through these slides here, read over the inventory suggestions, the rig check suggestions, that type of stuff. You are ultimately responsible for that vehicle. If you are assigned to drive it, or if you are assigned to be a crew member in general, anything that goes wrong with that vehicle is going to be on you. So make sure that you do that comprehensive assessment, that comprehensive check every single shift at the very beginning there, and then ongoing throughout. So after every call, you need to re-inventory, make sure you've got everything, you've replaced all the supplies that you used, and that all of your equipment, including batteries and stuff like that, are in working order, ready to go. This picture here shows her doing a vehicle check and checking the fluids under the hood. You don't have to be a vehicle mechanic to do this. Simply, you need to be able to identify when something is wrong, if something doesn't look right, if fluids are low, and then you report that to the appropriate individual or agency, and they'll take care of the ongoing maintenance of it. But you are not expected to be a mechanic by any means. There's going to be a lot as far as considerations when operating a larger vehicle, especially emergency vehicles. They have larger or longer stop distances. You actually increase your risk by operating lights and sirens. So we do that so that we can get to the scene faster, but we certainly increase the risk because people don't always respond appropriately when they see those flashing lights. A lot of times we'll see people panic. So rather than pull to the right and stop, they pull to the middle of the road, they keep going, they try to get through an intersection. We may have little kids that see you coming, they run out to the roadway to wave and say hi. It's one hazard after another. So there's an immense responsibility to an ambulance driver, and you have to really be prepared for that. Constantly aware, free of distractions, mentally in the zone. These are all things that, if any of that doesn't exist for whatever reason, we're opening ourselves up to a lot of trouble and the potential for injury to others. All right, going on, lots of recommendations, lots of ideas, but again, all agency specific when you get hired on. Responding and receiving calls. Emergency medical dispatchers take the 911 call, they gather a bunch of information, and they push it out to us so that we know where to go and what the nature of the incident is. Emergency medical dispatchers have an incredible amount of training and responsibility themselves. So they will not only get information on what's wrong and what's going on, but they have the ability to provide feedback back to the caller. They can give instructions on providing CPR. I've even got a recording of a dispatcher walking a father through the delivery of his child on the living room couch. So they have a pretty unique skill set nonetheless. So read through this stuff. A lot of it is common sense. Roll the emergency medical dispatcher, all the information that they get. Dispatching technology and protocols are different from agency to agency, system to system. So you'll become more familiar with that once you get on with a specific employer. Every state has individual laws, and all departments have individual policies. Prior to operating an emergency vehicle, you should read through all of the laws, know your department policies, and make sure that you have a complete understanding of that. One example would be Illinois Vehicle Code does allow for emergency vehicles to speed up and above the speed limit. However, that does not simply absolve you of any responsibility if you're driving too fast. So, for instance, you're allowed to exceed the speed limit by 10 miles per hour up to a certain speed. If you decide to go 20 miles per hour over the speed limit, no, you're probably not going to get pulled over by a police officer. However, if you end up getting into an accident or something like that, they could prove that you were being negligent, you weren't operating with due care, and in those cases, you're opening yourself up to a lot of liability again. So I know that liability is a common term that I've used so far over the last few minutes, and that's because that's really what it is. Obviously, having the patient's life in your hands when it comes to performing assessments and treatments and stuff like that, that's a huge responsibility. But simply driving to and from the scene is equally big. And there's probably more risk, more hazards to a driver than there is to the individual actually rendering the patient care. So read through all of your state laws, be familiar with them, know your limitations, and also be familiar with things like your emergency lighting or emergency warning devices. So state law says that we must operate both all audible and visual warning devices when we're operating in emergency mode. So that means that if I've got my lights on, I'm supposed to have my siren on. Now, if I'm driving through a residential neighborhood at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, there isn't another car in sight, do I need to have my siren blaring? I would argue that probably not. That's probably going to wake people up and upset people more than it's going to help. However, the law states you shall be operating in emergency mode with both visual and audible devices. So if I cognitively choose to operate outside the requirements of the law, that happens. You know, we all choose to do that. Every one of us is guilty of speeding, maybe rolling through a stop sign, you know, those types of things. We all create minor infractions. The thing that we have to understand, though, is that we're going to have to accept the responsibility and the liability if we get caught or if something happens from it. And as the driver of an emergency vehicle, the expectations for you are far higher than any general motorist on the road. So if you get caught speeding or you get into a fender bender, you know, in a parking lot in your civilian vehicle, it's probably not the end of the world. However, if that happens in a department vehicle, there's a lot more that comes along with it. So understand that driving an emergency vehicle is unlike driving any other vehicle that you've ever done in the past, and it takes an entirely new understanding and mindset. So we kind of hit on speed and safety there. We don't do much in the way of escorts, but thinking as far as time of day, day of the week, weather, those things, we really need to process the route we're going to take in all circumstances. You know, if it's a Tuesday in October and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I'm supposed to go past a school, you know, that's the fastest route to get to the call, I may want to consider diverting, going a couple blocks out of my way to avoid that school zone altogether. Because I know that in the presence of a lot of kids, parents picking kids up, school buses, there's a lot of congestion and a lot of risk. And although, yes, going past that school is the fastest route to get from point A to point B, it may be safer and more beneficial to take that 2 or 3 block detour, go around the school, and avoid those risks altogether. Same thing with weather. Thinking about if the roads are slick because there's ice or snow on the ground, and I'm supposed to try to climb this big hill in the road to get to where I'm going. It may be more beneficial to take another route that doesn't require climbing a hill, worse yet going down a hill, taking a lot of sharp curves, that type of stuff. So thinking about your route and considering all of the potential hazards are really important. Really quick, I wanted to touch base on the schools there too, or school buses rather. We are bound by the same laws as everybody when it comes to school buses and also railroad crossings. If a school bus is stopped and it has its stop sign and stop arm out, we stop. Even with lights and sirens, we stop. The school bus always has priority. Now, the school bus drivers are instructed to, if they see an emergency vehicle, pull the students onto the bus, get the students into a secure area, and then bring that stoplight in so that we can actually proceed through. But until that's done, we stop and we wait. And the same thing applies for a railroad crossing. Those gates are down or the lights are flashing, we stop exactly where we're at, and we don't move forward from there. Navigating, we have a lot of technology available to us these days, GPS being one of them. Nowadays, when I get an emergency call, it comes to a computer on my screen. I hit a map button, pops up a map. It gives me driving directions on how to get there. It's really, really great, quick and efficient. However, things fail. Technology fails. So I always need to be familiar with the back to basics approach. I need to know how to read a map. I need to understand the grid and numbering system for the district that I work in. I need to be very good at operating without technology because inevitably it will not be available when you need it. All right, seatbelts are mandatory, or they're a must at all times. The only time you may not wear a seatbelt is if it interferes with patient care. But even nowadays, the new ambulances have harnesses that allow you to still remain seatbelted and perform CPR at the same time. So they're really taking great strides forward to keep us safe. And not only is that safety for the crew, it's also safety for the patient. Because if I'm unsecured in the back of that ambulance and we get into an accident, what's there to say that I don't get launched on top of the patient and cause further harm? Highway safety operations, we'll talk a little bit about that in class, but generally speaking, we want to be aware of traffic, aware of fluid spills. We're going to wear highly reflective vests and just make sure that we're visible at all times. Transferring the patient to the ambulance, a lot of different options as far as what tools we may use. Is it simply going to be the cot? Do we need a stair chair? Is there snow or ice on the ground? Do we need to just carry the patient without a wheeled device? A lot of things to consider. And looking at this picture here, that it's going to be difficult to get them over some of that snowy roadway. So do we carry shovels in our ambulances? And should we shovel the walk really quick? Is this the type of call where we need to request additional resources to help us lift the patient safely? Getting a patient through the snow is not going to be an easy task, and if we do it without enough people and that cot falls and that patient becomes injured, we're on the hook again for that. They're going to say that we should have known that it was inclement weather, that the roads or the sidewalk was slick, we should have requested resources, and if we didn't, we're going to have to own the responsibility. Packaging the patient. This is actually kind of an interesting thing. So I had a stroke patient one time, and we got on scene, rapid assessment, quickly identified the presence of a stroke, got the patient onto the cot, into the ambulance, drove to the hospital, bada bing, bada boom, everything went just as planned. Until I got notification that the family had filed a complaint against us. And when we had moved the patient onto the cot and moved him outside, it was winter time, we didn't cover the patient in a blanket. It was an elderly patient. His adult children were there watching, and we didn't put a blanket on him. Simple as that. And they were upset that we didn't take into consideration their comfort and whatnot when we were providing care. Now, I argued, well, this patient had a life-threatening condition. We were trying to get them to the hospital. It was time sensitive, and we took what was a bigger priority at that point, and we treated that. And thinking back on it, you know, if my family, a family member of mine, is involved in an issue where they need EMS, I want to make sure that they're comfortable, that they're treated with respect. And yes, time is of the essence, life safety, etc. Those are all important things, but how long would it have taken me to throw a blanket over that patient? Just to show that, you know what, we are genuinely concerned about the patient's entire well-being, not just life threats. We do want to see them comfortable. We do want to be compassionate. And ultimately, those are requirements of our job. So yeah, the family was right. They should have filed the complaint. They did, and it was a learning experience for me. So take that for what you will, but we should be thinking about all of that when we're treating our patients. If a seatbelt is available on the cot or the backboard, we need to use it. Failure to use any of the patient restraint devices that are made available to us could ultimately result in some pretty big issues as far as liability, once again, if we were to get into an accident. Transporting the patient to the hospital, we want to continue the assessment. We want to always sit in a position that allows us to monitor our patient, monitor their mental status, their airway, and in that way, as soon as we identify a change in their condition, we can immediately provide interventions. All right, a few other recommendations on the transport. One of the things there, going back to the previous slide here, notifying the hospital. We're going to call an inbound radio report to the hospital and tell them, all right, we're coming to you with, you know, a patient this age, this gender. Here's what's going on with them. Here's what we've done. We'll provide them with kind of a brief summary. That allows the hospital to be prepared, make sure they have a room available to us, call any additional resources from the hospital down, and they're ready to go. Additionally, then when we get to the hospital, we're going to give what's called a bedside report. I'm going to talk directly to the nurse or doctor that's assuming care. We're going to look face to face. We're going to have a conversation. I'm going to tell them exactly what I found, what I did, any changes that I've noticed in the patient, and then we're going to formally transfer care over. Now, in addition to that, we also want to make sure that if we have any of the patient's belongings that we're leaving at the hospital, that we formally document and transfer the care over for that too. So, you know, hey, if Michelle is the name of the ER nurse, Michelle, I've got the patient's purse and cell phone here. I'm going to set it right here on the counter, and I'm transferring care of the patient along with their belongings to you. Formalize that and then document that in your patient care report. With pediatrics, consider the fact that they're going to be scared. Seeing an ambulance at a touch-a truck is much different than seeing the ambulance when they're actually the ones that are ill or injured. So we want to take care to offer up things like stuffed animals, speak in a calm voice, try to comfort them. If possible, have mom or dad in the back of the ambulance with us, and really just consider the fact that this is a very, very scary situation to them, and we want to try to make it as comforting as possible. All right, so transferring the patient care once we get to the hospital itself, kind of just touched on that. We want to give that bedside report, right? Make sure that we get any signatures that we need from our patient, from the nursing staff, file any paperwork, transfer the personal effects, and then we want to begin our patient care report. So as soon as we're done transferring care, first thing we should do is get our ambulance back in service, get everything cleaned up, restock any supplies that we used, and then we start working on that patient care report. And we want to get that report typed as soon as possible after the call, so that we can ensure that we don't miss or forget any of the information when we go to document it. Cleaning our rig is really important. Keep in mind that something like hepatitis C can stay alive. That virus can stay alive in dried blood for 7 to 10 days, meaning that, you know, if you look at this picture and you see the creases in a cushion, if a patient's blood got in there and it was contaminated, that virus could stay alive for 7 to 10 days. So we need to make sure that we're really doing a good job getting into all the cracks and crevices. We wipe down all of our equipment and make sure that the ambulance is clean and ready for the next patient, not only to protect future patients, but also to protect future EMS providers. All right, as far as radio operations and stuff like that, that's all department specific, so we're not going to get into any of this stuff. Those are just general recommendations. talking a little bit here about air rescue then. So in McHenry County, we use an agency called Flight for Life. They are based out of Northwestern Medicine, McHenry. And then they also have several other aircraft from other locations or other bases up in Wisconsin. In addition to Flight for Life, there's other agency providers that we are able to reach out to from other areas. And if we need multiple helicopters for some reason, we're able to coordinate that. Procedures for contacting a helicopter are agency specific, but typically you're going to request that through the dispatch center. Even your protocols on when to request a helicopter are specific, and you should review those through your protocol book, not through this PowerPoint. When we do request a helicopter, we want to make sure that we're giving them an accurate location as to where we need them to go. We need to secure safe landing zones. We need to have the means to communicate with them through the appropriate radio channels. And all these things should be coordinated through our dispatch and relayed through the helicopter dispatch agency as well. When we're identifying a landing zone, we want the landing zone to be level, free of obstructions like trees, power lines, fences, that type of stuff. And then we also want to make sure that we have appropriate sizes for it. So during the day, and this will be a test question, during the day, we want the landing zone to be 100 feet by 100 feet. And in the evening, we want the landing zone to be 150 feet by 150 feet. So again, a test question. During the day, 100 by 100. At night, 150 by 150. The other things that we want to do is make sure that anytime we're operating around a helicopter, that we're always operating downhill from the helicopter. If we were operating uphill, there's the risk that the rotors could create a hazard of some sort. So for another test question, make sure operation around a helicopter is always done downhill. More information on landing zones and helicopters are done through Flight for Life in-services. You will have an opportunity to attend an in-service along with the paramedic class this semester. In addition to that, when you begin working with an agency, most helicopter companies or agencies will actually come out and do individual in-services on an annual basis. So there you go. As far as approaching a helicopter, you should always be escorted by one of the crew members. You should never do it on your own. You never approach it from the rear of the aircraft. That tail rotor is a huge hazard. We always approach from the front of the aircraft. We always want to be downhill from the aircraft. And that's really it. Short and sweet. Like I said, there's a lot of information in this chapter. It's not that you, that since we breeze through it, it's not that it's not important information, but a lot of it will be specific to the agency that you begin to work with. So review it. Remember the important test question components there. And if you have any questions, reach out to any one of your instructors. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen, and enjoy the rest of your day.